Ad podcast. We have an exciting guest for you guys today. Camm Rowland is the Chief Creative Officer and the AI Officer at Kepler Group and named to Adweek's AI Power 50. As the Chief AI Officer, Camm is also an Emmy Award-winning creative leader and named to Adweek's AI Power 50, sitting right at the chaotic intersection of data, human design, and emerging technology. Before leading applied AI and creative at Kepler, he held executive creative director roles at Kohler Co and Digital Kitchen. What makes Camm fascinating is that he isn't just treating AI as an efficiency tool. He's actively mapping how AI changes the physics of consumer discovery, brand building, and the future of human creative talent. Today, we're going to dive deep into the death of traditional funnels, when to use AI versus human craft, and what happens to the next generation of creative professionals when speed replaces foundational skill building. Camm, welcome to the show, man.
Awesome. Thanks for the warm intro, Dylan. Super excited to chat.
Yeah, let's go. So, I think you have an interesting background. I think you're the only person that I've interviewed 450 shows thus far who has a creative executive title and an AI executive title. You kind of expect that generally to come from technology sides of the house. So I think you have a really interesting perspective. But before we dive too deep into that, maybe you can give us a little context of, where'd you grow up, what'd you study, and how did you get into agency land?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start early and end at the current day a little bit and give you a speed run here. I grew up in Southern California, so your stories about California resonate with me. I wish I could be out there right now. I grew up in Southern California around the age of 11 or 12. I moved to Michigan, so from kind of outside of LA to a kind of small town environment in Michigan, which is a pretty big shift. But from that early age, I was really focused on two things. I was really into sports and I was really into art from early on in my life, just drawing, writing, and everything. So the creative component of what I do today is sort of baked in from day one, sort of genetically. So I grew up in Southwest Michigan. I ended up going to college in Illinois and studying art history and graphic design with a sort of side helping of philosophy. And this is really when I started my career. I actually finished up college by taking an internship at Digital Kitchen, which you noted as the first place that I worked. And that was a great opportunity to sort of come in with just that design background, just that interest in art, that sort of love of music and storytelling. And I started at Digital Kitchen at the end of my senior year as unpaid internship. I don't think they do that anymore, but at the time,
yeah, I think it might be against the law now, right? You gotta at least give minimum wage.
Yeah, but for college credit, right? Because I was still in school, and
sure.
And this is when the era was like you're really lucky to be in the presence of amazingly talented people, which they were, and it was a really great company and still is. But you start out you're running coffee and picking up lighting kits for shoots and stuff like that. But I did have an opportunity. The team there who was amazingly talented. They saw something in me and my work and kind of let me stick my foot in the door a little bit and start contributing creatively. And I had some opportunity and really fortunate to have some early success in that. Some of the very first things that I put together, early storyboards and scripts and stuff like that for commercials that, Digital Kitchen was working on. Those were awarded projects. So I was basically a complete sort of newbie out, doing live action shoots and seeing things that I had mocked up and written kind of becoming real. And it was a super exciting way to start your career really young, to be like, wow, this is really incredible to make that jump into that kind of world. So that was awesome. And that agency at the time was, could be considered like a production company / sort of design company. At the time, most of our clients were other agencies. So we weren't really in the direct, we didn't really work directly with brands at that point. It was mostly agencies. And so we were in that mode for a while. And we really discovered, our best work was the work that we were, originating truly. And so the stuff we were really proud of, a lot of the stuff that people know Digital Kitchen for, like highly creative main title sequences to TV shows and stuff like that. And so we found that was really, our greatest skill was doing that. So we started working directly with brands, and then evolved into a different kind of agency, very sort of, it sounds a little cliche now looking back, but trying to be really disruptive, trying to do things and garner a lot of earned media, and just be really sort of thinking outside the box. And we worked with clients like HBO and things that let us really take the governor off and do a lot of really exciting things. And then we went into more sort of experiential and interactive work and things like that. And I ended up, during the course of my career, as you mentioned, as I ended my career there, having been the executive creative director for a number of years. So kind of working from, carrying coffee to leading creatively was a fun journey to go after. And it's great to be part of, all the steps of the process, right? So you really kind of have a really well-grounded sense of what goes into the work when you've kind of worked every single different kind of role throughout. At that time, when I was wrapping up Digital Kitchen, I came to Kohler Company up here, and that's what brought me to Wisconsin, where I currently am, and came up to lead creative for Kohler, and that was a really amazing experience too, having spent time on sort of the production side, then kind of almost by just the gravitational pull of what was going on with Digital Kitchen, kind of getting that agency experience and working directly with brands, then going brand side and having that entire dimension sort of filled out, like, wow, it's interesting to be on the other side of the table. This is what it feels like to get pitched to. This is how we make decisions and things at the brand, and just really understanding the inner workings of a brand was incredibly valuable. And so I led that team creatively. Kohler, as a lot of people know, is a kitchen and bath brand. People know Kohler for, bathtubs and sinks and toilets and all that good stuff. But there's a whole bunch of brands at Kohler, dozens of brands that live within that global sort of brand umbrella. So it was a very diverse creative experience, being able to touch and guide all those brands. And then, now we're getting more towards the present day. A handful of you, a few years ago, when a lot of this, AI started really sort of taking hold, and I wouldn't even say taking hold. It was sort of poking its head up. And in some of those early things, like some of the things that really excited me were, these very early sort of experiments, like NVIDIA did little experiments online where you could paint with a little green paintbrush and turn it into trees and stuff that was like pre Midjourney, Chat GPT and things like that. And that kind of gave me the bug for, oh my gosh, I can kind of see where this is going. Obviously, no one could really predict how it's exploded and how fast it's moved, but it gave me that sense of like, wow, this is actually really, really, different, and it's going to create a lot of change. And so I really, focused in on that and became, a little bit, I wouldn't say obsessed, but just preoccupied in a healthy way with what those possibilities were. And that's what led me to make a career change and go from the brand side to where I am now, which is at Kepler Group, which is in a historical context, you'd think of it as like a media company. It came out of programmatic, started by people squarely in the media space, and has evolved really tremendously to where it is now, and including when I joined, bringing creative to the table as well. So now it's really truly a sort of full service, full funnel growth marketing agency. It's been around for about 14 years and grown, across probably a dozen offices around the globe. And we're doing now that whole combination of data and analytics, and then bringing creative to the table there. So really, really sitting side by side, which to me is the coolest thing about kind of the opportunity to come over to Kepler, was that there's always, I shouldn't say always, but in a lot of cases, there's a real siloing of the media side and the analytics and the insights that's, extracted from customer behavior and how the content performs, and then the creative teams that actually, build it and can improve it. So really kind of brought those two things together at Kepler. And that's where I am today. And kind of like you said, wearing a couple hats, leading the creative organization and also sort of spearheading a lot of our applied AI. So kind of, inventor kind of role to think about how we can apply AI to, add value for our clients and help Kepler grow.
Love it. So I'm going to go back to my comment on, that blended creative and AI C-level within the Kepler Group and the agency. Do you feel like that's unique? Because it does seem, to at least, I get to talk to a lot of C-level agency leaders, and I haven't seen as many really straddle that, kind of coming from the creative side of the house and now being like the primary person thinking about AI across the org. Do you think that's unique?
I think it's definitely unusual, and it's an exciting place to be, because it really lets you turn up both sides of the brain, right? I've spent most of my career. Well, I've always kind of been a little bit analytical. I've always been a little bit like left brain, right brain, but this is when it really turns on. Really, when like when you feel both of those cylinders like firing fully. And so it is a really exciting and kind of unusual position. I've looked for it before to see, are there other people doing the type of thing that I'm doing? I think it generally is maybe rare, because I haven't really been able to find a lot of examples. If anybody watching your program sits in both sides of the camp, I'd love to chat with them, because I do think you think a little bit differently. You're thinking both in terms of creative in this sort of traditional and classical sense of craft and storytelling, but when you are using the sort of AI part of your brain, you're really thinking in terms of systems, and it's just a very different kind of way. You're almost thinking about how to build things that solve problems, and it's a weird sort of overlap that for somebody like myself is a really sort of satisfying kind of intersection to be at.
Yeah, it's exciting. So let's get into a few of the different topics that I wanted to roll through today. So I want to talk, you guys came out of, like you mentioned, the programmatic side of the ecosystem, which is oftentimes focused on, using data to drive low funnel results across the open web, helping brands find the right customers at the right moment. Everyone right now is talking about generative engine optimization and the idea of SEO 2.0. The idea that 60% of clicks now no longer, or Google searches no longer end with a click, and that the way that we interface with chatbots are kind of in these conversations or these long queries versus kind of fast searches on Google. I would wonder, what is your kind of broader assessment of the funnel right now, where you've got consumers spending more time in these AI chatbots, and then really informed and really ready to take action when they finally do decide to visit our clients' websites and take action?
And I think it's a really interesting topic to hit, because the conversation is largely right now sitting in that geo area, mm-hmm. right? We're thinking about it as almost a new form of SEO, and in a lot of ways it's very similar, right? A lot of the conversations I have around geo are like, oh, this is a lot like SEO, and I think that's very true. But we're as people, and it's a hot topic. I think it was probably a pretty big topic at Camm this year and the prior year. I think that the thing that interests me the most is, let's assume this progression continues. Let's assume people continue to go to their AIs, their assistants, who know them really well, who have access to the entirety of the internet, and are really, really good at sort of honing in and making good product recommendations that are specifically to you. Your chat is going to return you different recommendations if you're asking for a particular kind of product, because you have different preferences and all that. So I think let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that this continues to go and up and up and up, and in a sort of exponential rate. Then I think the interesting story is like, okay, well, geo is all about showing up in those results. It's all about making your brand appear when people are in consideration. But what's going to happen outside of that, right? So, okay, let's say that happens. What does that do to the funnel? We've basically taken the mid and lower funnel and kind of collapsed it, right? That could have it could have played out over a lot of touch points. It could have been, you saw an ad, you clicked on it, you went to a website, you visited that, you're getting, a cookie, you're getting a retargeted ad, you're getting email sent to you, this, that, and the other, your abandoned cart, it reaches out to you. So that whole sort of funnel experience that goes from, I'm thinking maybe about a purchase in this kind of space, to I've made the purchase, is a lot of, relatively trackable sort of behavior. And when that collapses down into potentially a single conversation that isn't really visible to the brand, right? And to, media companies and things that are looking into those analytics, because as you know, these models and labs are not creating a backdoor where you can look at what people are talking about, right? You know, somebody bought something off of my website. I used to have more insight into why that happened. Now I don't so much. And I think that to me is an implication that I don't think that conversation is fully taken on yet. I think people are still in the let's make sure we show up in the results part of the conversation, but not fully stepped into like, okay, yes, but what are we going to do about, you know, the traditional funnel and the way we think about it and the way we spend towards it? So I feel like, you know, and this is just kind of a little bit gut level and, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I tend to feel like the importance of brand building is only going to get stronger. Some people would say, oh, AI is helping you solve these, you know, find what you want. So brand building doesn't become as important and people are going to stop building brands with storytelling in that way. I actually think it's probably the opposite, because you need that predisposition and that preference and that salience for when your AI, right, serves you up the options. And if you love one of those brands on that list, or at least familiar with them, I think that's gonna be where that, you know, brand building effort pays off, is actually down there when you're having that conversation with that AI. So I think it goes from, you know, maybe theoretically maybe some of that spend and energy that's going into that conversion actually sort of migrates up and says, okay, well, we're going to work on that brand building part, but also moving some of those dollars towards, you know, geo and trying to make your product or your service sort of defensively recommendable by the AI. And we know how different that is. And we know the kind of data sources that it uses. And we know that it's more obviously objective than people. We don't remember, the AI doesn't remember the jingle that you know, heard in the 80s or the 90s or whatever that makes you kind of like that. It's going to be more objective. It's going to be, you know, more sort of hard proof point based. So I kind of see things maybe moving a little bit more in a sort of bifurcated way, where brand building kind of takes on a new dimension, where it's really there to help you make that final, you know, to a large part, help you make that final decision and navigate that with your AI.
So you were talking a lot in the moment of kind of conversational commerce, where you're talking to AI, but ultimately at the end of the day, the consumer is most likely making their own purchase journey. They're still pulling out a credit card, typing it in, using a digital wallet, using PayPal. They're responsible for the transaction. You know, the next frontier, I suppose, is agentic commerce, where we actually hand the credit card over to these AIs and we start outsourcing decision making. The idea that probably, you know, things that are considered commodities, maybe this, you know, soda here, this sparkled water. Do I really care what brand it is? Not really. I just care that it fizzes and it tastes like something other than plain water, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you know, the AI might understand that about me in the future as I start to say, okay, well, you know, this is a relatively low stakes transaction. If AI screws up the order on the water, I'm not going to be drastically disappointed. But if they bought a new camera for my podcast or a new microphone or a new cell phone, for instance, and didn't understand my brand loyalty to the Apple ecosystem, then I'd probably be pretty upset. So as we move into a world where we start to outsource actual purchasing power to AIs, how do you think brand building changes there? But maybe those are the instances in which I will tell an AI, hey, my preference is for this particular product, in maybe the rare occasions that I do have a preference and I care about speed, price, and efficiency.
Yeah, well, you know, one thing that's interesting about the way all this, I think, can impact brands is that the value of the experience people have is going to become, it's not that it wasn't important before, but we also have relatively short-term memories. So, right, you say you buy that soda and you're like, oh, don't love this, right? You may not remember permanently that that's on your no-no list, right? If you have, and I think increasingly this is going to become a thing, whether we think it's a little, you know, Black Mirror or a little, you know, a little creepy, is we're going to have AI as more of a ambient, you know, role in our lives. And when you try that sparkling water that you hate, or you go to a hotel that didn't deliver on expectations, or you buy a product that didn't assemble easily and you're frustrated with the customer service and things like that, as AI becomes more ambient, it's going to know that stuff. It's going to remember that stuff, right? Better than you can, better than I can. And so the value of like a high quality customer experience, I think, becomes even more important, because your AI will know your tastes, again, this is under the sort of idea that AI becomes more ambient, and it's capturing more of what you communicate to it. Whether that's through your online behavior or things you say out loud. You could say, man, this soda is really gross, right? Your AI is going to maybe know that, in the future. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on, brands doing what they need to focus on, which is like giving customers great experiences, give them great products, give them great, experiences. And that balance of, where marketing plays a role in that, which is a lot of times, well, the product experience might not be great, but we're going to make really great marketing and great advertising that's going to kind of, counteract maybe some weaknesses of the product. I think I had a sort of piece that I wrote a number of years ago entitled Brand Meritocracy. And the idea was basically, with AI sort of leveling the playing field a little bit, and having more of a unbiased, unfiltered view on products, it's going to kind of force brands to, focus on what matters, which is the experience of their product and the quality of their product and the way that, their customers experience their brand. So I think that I think it would be interesting to see a subtle shift towards focus on the quality of the product and experience, because you'll have less sort of ground cover from marketing sort of changing perception, right? In the way that it may have before. You might have previously bought Energizer batteries, right? Because you thought the bunny it stuck with you, right? And it almost superseded, maybe you had an experience where maybe the Energizer battery didn't last as long as the Duracell battery or the Panasonic battery or something like that, but you still made that decision. I think that brand meritocracy idea is going to kind of maybe drive a little bit more focus on things that benefit the customer versus benefiting the brand. Obviously it's going to benefit the brand to make the product better, but it's sort of disproportionately working in the favor of the customer.
I like that idea of AI having, a longer memory of bad brand experience or good brand experience, and it kind of being your co-pilot in the background. I mean, we all have the experience of saying something and then seeing an ad in either Meta or Google that feels like we're being listened to, whether it's the algorithm or whether they're actually listening. At the end of the day, I tend to lean into the camp of like, I don't care if they're listening, if it makes a better experience for me as the end consumer. I actually think that's a good thing. But
I'm a little bit in that same camp where I kind of don't buy some of this. We're not listening, because you're like, no,
it seems too good.
Something about, this for the first time in 10 years. And I immediately saw it show up as an ad on my Alexa in my kitchen or something like that. I'm like, I don't know. It's a little creepy as a coincidence, but
yeah.
Yeah. And
but extremely useful though, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I'll admit I've got little listening devices all over. I love the convenience of smart home kind of assistants and things like that. And I'm sort of like, if they happen to be listening to me, talk to my kids about, what they did that day, is that an invasion of privacy? Yeah. But it's the balance of, I'm not saying anything all that interesting. So I'm not super worried about it learning from me. But I think also that notion of the ambient nature would be, imagine wearables and things people are, carrying with them that are listening. And there's already a lot of devices. They haven't necessarily struck the right nerve with customers yet. When you see some of these wearables and things come out, there's a lot of sort of negative sentiment and people not necessarily loving them. But I do think at some point they're going to break through and they get the right form factor and the right, and the time is right, they're going to happen. But if you think about that data collection of sentiment, right? Like, anybody's like, oh, this McDonald's is really delicious. Like, that's feeding into a larger ecosystem of sort of model training. And maybe the fact that you thought that burger was delicious might actually feed in, right? It's actually maybe going to goose the recommendation to be recommending McDonald's or something to somebody else. So I think that's going to be just a really interesting thing. It's a little bit like how you may have heard of people refer to Tesla as like a data company, not a automobile company, right? Because it's just collecting just an insane amount of data. Because it's
both in the car and on the outside, right?
In the car, on the outside, everything you do in the car. So, I think all that stuff is just going to start pumping into these models and making them, more knowledgeable as we just go about our daily lives.
I like the idea that you think about AI as less of an efficiency tool and really considering the future of human creative talent. I think one thing, I've always been a business development person in the agency world, but, I always preface anytime I'm in a meeting and I have an idea and I say, but I'm just a sales guy. And, sometimes my ideas break through, but I do notice that AI really lowers the barrier to what creatives used to do, not devaluing in any stretch of the imagination, but like I'll give an example. When I was going to Cannes this year and I was putting together my interviews, there was I was interviewing the chief revenue officer of a major publishing company that you would know the name if I mentioned it. And it's, very Devil Wears Prada-esque is kind of, the vibe.
Yeah.
And they just kept grinding me on like, how big is your audience? Who's the target audience? They were really vetting it super heavily. And that's okay. I don't mind that. And then they asked me a question that I thought was like so wild. They're like, who else are you interviewing at Cannes? And I literally was interviewing like 60 other people. And in the past, I would have just been like, okay, I'm done dealing with this person. Like they can either take it or leave it. But because it was so easy, I just literally went to Gemini because Gemini's connected to my Google Calendar. And I said, hey, Gemini, who am I interviewing at Cannes? 60 people,
yeah, right.
name, title, company, cut and paste, sent it back to them. And that got them quiet. And eventually they booked the meeting. But the other cool part was I took that information and I said, okay, now Gemini, could you create an infographic of all these people that I'm interviewing at Cannes? Can you put it into an infographic? And then 10 minutes later, there was a cool infographic. The ad podcast lineup at Cannes. Here's all the speakers, cool pictures of boats and people partying and drinking rosé, like all the stereotypes, all the things that you would want in your Cannes infographic. And then I put it in LinkedIn and I tagged every single person, every single company. It became this kind of like this little viral post. But in the past, I would have had to hire a graphic designer. I would have had to go to my calendar. It was like all that stuff. It was like busy work accomplished that then inspired an idea for like a social media post, which I think
100%.
And that's as a sales guy, sitting here, getting my stuff done.
Well, we're all more than just a fill in the blank now.
You're right.
I just wear so many hats that I think the days of, well, I'm just the analytics guy, or I'm just the marketing guy, or I'm just the creative guy, or whatever is we'll start to see that kind of refrain, not exist as much because, while we're not necessarily expert in some of these things, like I can, make something that codes something really complex using a programming language I don't know, right? And I can't say that I know that language, but I have the tools to be able to deploy something using that language. So it gives us a sense of like, wow, I feel like I've got all these sort of superpowers and I can kind of do anything. It's exciting to see that kind of thing, and the way that you're able to just sort of squash something that would like, I can't do this. Like I can't dig up all this information. I can't, communicate that. I'm not, you sort of said, in terms of, efficiency, I'm very pro efficiency for me personally. I mean, that's what gives me any kind of brain space. So while it's not purely an efficiency tool, I don't want to sell short how much thinking about efficiency can enable you to do other things, right? Like you said, you created content that you wouldn't have otherwise created because it would have, there would have been sort of logistical, just busy work in between you and that thing. Some of my favorite things, and like we make a lot of really cool content. I work on a lot of really amazing software with a bunch of brilliant engineers and things like that. And sometimes some of my favorite things are just those little things that kind of do what you described, right? I was sharing with somebody what is like one of your, your favorite, little ticky-tacky things, nothing like big, but just like, what's a little ticky-tacky thing? And I said, the Claude skill I set up to help me schedule meetings. was like one of the best things. It's, you want to have a meeting with somebody in London and you're in Central Time, and you've got to factor in their window of when their workday is and when mine is, and but look across to a 2 week time span. How do you find that? How do you, if you've got an administrative assistant or something who's going to pour their time into it manually, then you have an easy button there. But for a lot of people, it's like, oh, I got to kind of toil around and solve some of these problems. So some of my favorite things are just like, oh, wow, I got 45 minutes a week back from creating just a small efficiency tool. So I love that stuff. But to your point, yeah, I mean, efficiency is the third of sort of 3 stages of sort of AI enlightenment, right? There's like the first lowest hanging fruit is, let's do the stuff that I have to do, but just get it done faster and more efficiently. And that's where we all kind of go to as our generally our first thing. And brands do this, and agencies do this. Or like, what can we do? Replicate the processes that we're currently doing and do those in a more efficient way. Then you get to, how do we do what we do better? Like, how can I make that podcast actually a better podcast? How can I make that ad actually a more effective ad? And then lastly, once you kind of are in that space and you start thinking about, oh my gosh, it starts opening your eyes to what's actually possible. What are the things I couldn't have done at all previously? Things that were completely off the table. And it's kind of hard to think that way. That's the hardest category to think in, right? Because it's like, think of a thing you need before it exists, right? Like once you have, I'll give the example of like, push button start on a car. You don't really know you need it until it exists, and you go, that's pretty great. Or our cell phones and those kinds of devices, you don't really realize that it's something you would be dependent on when they don't exist. So I think it's a hard category to think about, but I try to challenge our teams to be thinking, yes, there's the things that we can do that we do. We can do those faster and smarter. Yes, we can actually do those better and get better results. But like, aim for the horizon of what could we actually be doing that's just hasn't ever been even remotely possible before. And when you think about that, when you start batting around those challenges, it's actually really hard to think of something you couldn't do. There's so many. I mean, I'm referring to things you couldn't do on a computer. I should specify that, but within the realm of compute, like what a computer can do, it's very hard to think of anything that's not possible.
It's off the table.
I think of something. It's like, oh no, that's not doable. It's almost it sounds cheesy, but it's really just your imagination is to a certain degree the limit of what can be done now, and that to me is super exciting.
Yeah, going back to like the skills based thing, and when I talked about efficiency, I think what I mean is eliminating headcount in favor of AI, right? It's like, I feel like the conversation around AI is coming for your job, I think, has kind of been put to bed. I think every smart organization is not using AI to replace people. They're using it to supercharge people. They're using it to reskill people. IKEA took their call center workers and turned them into interior decorators and put them on the floor of IKEAs with customers and created a new business unit and gave them more fulfilling work. I think it's like, companies that are using AI strictly for headcount reduction are probably missing the point. But, I also love the idea of like the traditional skill building components. Like, I'll give it another example. Over the holidays, I've had an ad campaign for my little sales consultancy in my head for 10 years, and just always thought, like, when I get that extra $20,000 or whatever and can go hire a production company to do it, this is what it would look like. And I literally made a version of that ad over the holidays with Adobe Firefly, just by knowing the scenes, having it had it play out in my head so many times, knew exactly what I want. And it wasn't something I was proud enough to put on, into an advertising campaign and actually run media to, but it was a proof of concept that validated the idea that I could have handed to a production company or somebody and say, hey, this is my exact vision. It would be so much easier for them to like take it and run with it. Right.
I love that. And that, first of all, the first note you had around, the sort of AI is coming for your job narrative and not sort of playing out in that sort of doom and gloom kind of scenario. It's nice to see what's kind of happening. And I don't have the statistics on hand necessarily, but what I've gleaned from listening to a variety of news sources and reading in articles and things is that companies that are, really moving into utilizing AI heavily are hiring more than companies who aren't. So, I think it's not only, that opportunist, like finding ways to upskill your people and make them more powerful, and brands having the sort of foresight to know like this is the way of the future. I think they've maybe heard enough times that like efficiency AI and just seeing how many headcount you can cut isn't going to be the way that brands are going to thrive. You need to, embrace the human creativity, the human insight, empower your people, give them the right tools, give them the right, runway to create. I think that's really powerful. So I'm excited that this year hasn't seen much of any of that doom and gloom. I mean, there's certainly, there's plenty of examples of where there's exceptions to that, right? You look at, big companies and it's like, big layoffs in certain areas. So I wouldn't say it's universally true, but generally speaking, I think that narrative that was so one-sided has kind of not played out in the way that people were kind of thinking it might, which is encouraging, because that human component is really the differentiator. And, everybody said, which is funny for me because I actually do a talk where I talk about AI's capacity for creativity and sort of argue that it can be creative. But in the same breath, I show statistics from a like a study that was done. I forget the name of the university where it was done, but it showed that AI was on these sort of cognitive creativity tests were outperforming like vast numbers of people. Like it would score in like the top 2 or 3% across all these different sort of metrics of creativity, but it didn't beat all of them. So in effect, what it was saying is AI is not more creative than people. It's just more creative than most people. Which that might sound still a little doom and gloom, but I mean, I think it's a balance. We can't say AI is not creative because it's pattern recognition and it's not possible for it to generate new combinations of ideas, because that's the way our brains work, right? We're grabbing little bits of things in our memory and little things that we're seeing and observing, and we're pairing them together and we're putting them in new combinations. And that's what a new idea is. It's a combination of two things that combination really didn't exist before. And that's really the way AI works too. It's finding patterns. And if you ask it for, something really simple, it's going to give you a really simple answer. What are 2 flavors of ice cream, chocolate and vanilla? But if you ask like, how many elephants does it take to fill up a pool on the moon? You're going to get like what you put into it, produces interesting outputs when you come out. So I think there's a lot to be said for what AI can do in terms of creativity, but I've still never, out of all the attempts that I've done and honing different AIs to do different things and creating processes to extract creative value and sort of like a great idea, right? Like to me, I would feel like an aha moment if I created a system that could generate an idea where I was like, now that's human level creativity that I didn't think was possible from an AI. I haven't hit that point yet. What I can get out of it is a lot of defensible ideas, right? A lot of what you get, even if you really push it and pull it in a lot of different ways, you get a lot of really defensible ideas. You get things that they're on strategy. They may be on budget. They align with brand values and they're in the right brand voice and they're polished, right? So they're defensible and you could probably, sell those ideas, but they're not memorable, right? They're not taking it to that next level where you're like, wow, there's really something to that. There's some kind of magic that's happening there. So I tend to treat it as, and our teams sort of treat it as a fuel. Like if you're gonna use AI, use it as a thought partner. Use it to throw challenging ideas at you. Use it to generate. When you're in an agency environment, and see you've got a bunch of mid to junior level people. They're going to bring lots of ideas, just like tons and tons of ideas. Most of them are bad, but there's little good things in them. Right. And it's the same to a certain degree, I think, with AI. It's going to give you a lot of stuff. You're like, no. But there's something there I want to mine. And whether it's copywriting or it's something conceptual, that's what I usually find its value is. Like it sort of missed the point on something. It didn't produce something very great, but it did introduce into my sort of flow of thought. It did introduce a new ingredient where I can go, that suggestion is actually terrible, but there's something
this element is usable.
There's a germ of an idea there that you actually can take in someplace else. So I suggest to our teams, and we have processes where we use AI to generate lots of sort of fuel that goes into our fire. And then then when you combine that with the productivity aspects of it, you go from people being too busy to think strategically, too busy to like actually turn on the creative and strategic parts of their brain because they're too busy making the sausage. Once you give them that freedom and you've knocked down some of those barriers by taking some of those time intensive tasks away, then you're like, let's get in there. Let's actually start revving up that really uniquely human part of what we are. And, you know, that's what, if agencies are around in the future, which I hope we are, right. We're going to be here because of really smart, strategic, brilliant people thinking the way that only human beings can. Because otherwise, you know, where's the sort of value in the you know, working with people at all if they can't bring anything to the table that's achievable with AI? So I think there's a real magic to it. And I've done my darndest job to try to extract something like that out of AI and just haven't hit that level yet. So
I'd like to talk about the authenticity piece because there is a bit of a you know, recoiling, if for lack of a better word, to AI generated content, even if it's indistinguishable, at the level of especially like the younger and younger generations. So, and then there's also this element that the social media applications, at least at this point, are asking or inserting an AI made with AI, you know, footnote or watermark, for lack of a better word. So I talked to somebody in media the other day, and they said that if anything has to be labeled AI in an ad and young people see that ad, it decreases all the performance KPIs. View through, click through, you know, engagement, like people, even if it's good, even if it's interesting content, just the label of made with AI hurts performance, leads to lower ad scores, and ends up costing a brand more money in media dollars. So do you think there's going to be a premium, at least as it pertains to content creation for social, with this idea that like made with AI or human made?
Right. Human made
like,
tag on
it. Like has some degree of currency.
I think that is a really interesting time and place where we are now, to a certain degree, because the percentage of content that's going to be made with AI, it's going to go from like, you know, we're already, I don't know where exactly we are in the scales tipping in terms of percentage of content that's generated by AI versus, you know, organically generated by people. But, you know, of course, people using Photoshop, there's AI in that, right? So it's almost to a certain degree, like you can say made with AI and it's watermarked because it came directly out of Midjourney. But if you made a thing that didn't come out of one of these generative engines, the process that brought you there, whether that's, you know, using Gemini to think about ideas, to using Photoshop, which has AI, to, you know, hone your imagery, so on and so forth. So most of the tools having AI built into them, from your refrigerator to every app on your computer, are it's going to be a little hard at some point to say, you know, not made with generative AI. But I think that in the time and place we are now, that's really interesting sort of you know, challenge. And, you know, I read a study that was really interesting. It was about sort of a disclosure, and they put ads in front of people and asked them which they liked more. And disproportionately, the ads that were made with AI were scored higher than the ads that were human made. And that might be because the images look more, they popped more, right? Or the compositions were more dynamic in a way that you could achieve with AI potentially than you could with, you know, traditional photography or compositing or something like that. But they scored better. And then when it was disclosed to them what sort of the source was, it immediately sort of tips the scale. So it's like, oh, I liked version A. Oh, that's made with AI. I kind of like version B better. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's that idea. So I think where we are, time and place right now, it's an interesting conversation because we're still in the realm of kind of maybe approaching an equilibrium of how much content is made by sort of either side. I think when it gets to the point, which I think is probably inevitable for just economic reasons and just the demands of what, you know, marketing requires and the amount of content people want to make, right? Creators wanting to make more and more and more, just the volume is going to go up. So when let's say for example, and there's an AI institute in like Denmark that projected that 99.9% of content on the internet was going to be AI generated by this certain date, which is nearing. If that were the case, let's say that's the case, just for the sake of argument, does labeling almost every piece of content in the world with made by AI, does it have any kind of consequence? But I think on the inverted side, it's the specialness of things that are made by humans, right? So that premium that gets when a filmmaker says there was no AI used in this, or if it's a Christopher Nolan type of person who's like, we did it the old school way, we didn't use any of these tools. I think there will be a premium on that. I think the question will be, when we get to that point where people are people are probably going to be a little less offended by AI, maybe in the future. I don't know if that's true, but I kind of feel like when it's as ubiquitous as it probably will be, like, who can be offended by everything, right? If it hits that threshold, it's like, I can't go about life being offended by or hating everything I see because AI was used in the creation of most content. But I think that premium that some brands are going to put into saying, like, we're going to have this all natural, like, this is going to be crafted by hand. Every photograph is a real photograph, and more power to them. I wonder how many brands are going to be willing to pay for that margin of difference, right? When a photograph, for example, or a graphic design can look, great, superficially great, right? It looks at this level, and the version that costs maybe 10x more than that because it took the human labor and expertise, and you're paying somebody for the 30 years of expertise they had. It looks maybe a little better, again, superficially. I'm not talking about conceptually, just like superficially, how far can you elevate above the photograph that was trained on a million great photographs, and billions of great photographs? How much are you willing to pay for that difference? Are you willing to pay 10x for that? And some people will probably see it like, I can tell that was human made. And that one, you know what I mean? And especially as that gap closes, because AI, it's the Will Smith eating spaghetti scenario, right? Like a couple years back, show a video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it was, of course, hideous and unrealistic. And now it's looking pretty good. So that gap is closing so fast. But, paper thin difference between paying X and paying 10x potentially, and like how are brands going to navigate that? Which brands are going to want to, pay for that premium? I hope a lot of them do. I mean, I went to fine art school. I love making things with my hands. I'm very pro human craft. But it'll be interesting to see how brands navigate that, and which ones are, will foot the bill for that kind of cost.
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of synthetic creators or synthetic content versus human created content. I saw a demonstration that was similar to your experiment where AI created something and then it told them that it was AI created. This was more of like, can you spot the AI?
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the context of an avatar that creators could use to basically create content when they were on vacation or didn't feel like, turning on the camera. So, they put up first, I think, a 4-quadrant, like, here's the creator in 4 different scenarios, played a clip, and only half the room could identify the one that was AI versus the one that wasn't. Then they put a side-by-side, did it again, same thing. It was about 50-50. This was a crowded, noisy, Shinerbach-filled room in South by Southwest in Texas in a bar. But I wonder, if the results would have been similar. Do you think there is probably, like you said, there will either be a point where we can't tell the difference, or the inputs are so ubiquitous in all the tools and all the things we use that even if it isn't explicitly generated only from AI and it had to have the tag, all the tools and even the thinking that went into create the asset or create the film or create the picture all had elements, maybe even majority elements of AI creation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things too is, like, as you think about, and I actually heard, I don't know, I heard this recently. It'd be really funny if I heard this on your show, because you could be like, oh, that was a comment on my show. Was a little anecdote about a brand that was doing, they put their business up for review, and they had an RFP out, and they they had a few agencies come in, and they kind of called it after. You're shaking your head like maybe you know what I'm talking about.
So is this the one where the agencies came in to pitch and they all gave the same pitch?
Yes, exactly. Is that did I hear that from yours?
Yep.
That's funny.
Yeah, or maybe that person on the consultant side, told that story in more than one context, which I wouldn't be surprised, because it is fairly shocking, right?
Yeah, but even if it's mythology, it seems like this is what we're kind of concerned about, right? We're the
race to the
everybody, middle. The sort of everybody just kind of gravitating towards the middle, and if we're all using the same tools, and we're in that anecdote, right, all the same ideas, because everybody went and took the brief and put it against the same models or similar models, and those models return similar strategic recommendations, and everybody comes back and it's like, we've got great stuff for you, and like everybody presented the same thing, and the same thing can be extrapolated across creative, and every fashion brand looking the same, every CPG brand looking the same in their category or whatever. I think that's a real lookout. Like how can brands like maintain their distinctiveness when this sort of ubiquity of these tools and the things that they're trained on, there's a lot of energy that goes into trying to use the tools and produce distinctive outputs. Because if you don't give it anything to go on, right, it's just going to give you something that's like, oh, that looks like everything else, right? So it is possible to train AI to produce things in a particular language. So if you say, I have a really distinct brand voice, I have a particular look and feel, you can train your AI to be able to replicate that in a way so that you can kind of try to hone your direction. Though it's really, there's no moat. Right. Before, it could have been like, well, they look that way because they shoot with this particular incredible photographer. They look that way because they work with this particular incredible illustrator. And that moat is gone. Definitely not making a judgment on for better or for worse, because there's tons and tons of great arguments as to why that's a huge problem. Right. So that anybody can create any kind of illustration. And who knows all the millions of artists who that's kind of cherry picking little bits of aesthetics from. But I think you can, morality aside, you can look at a brand and say, like, I can hone the look and feel of something that's unique. You got to put more energy into it. The same way you have to do it with AI created writing, right? I'm sure I've had experience with this, making content. All the silly things that AI does, you're just like, oh my gosh, this sounds so AI generated, right? And it's got all these obvious tells, the classic, the three, the comma structure and the end dashes and all of that stuff, right? Which people go, oh, this is AI, but it goes a lot deeper than that. There's a lot more behavioral stuff that are those tells. And so to create a unique brand voice where you can also use generative AI to kind of help you produce content, it takes a lot of work to get AI to produce those outputs in a way that's uniquely, aligned with your brand and the way you want to talk about your brand and the way you want to talk to customers. But to work out of its system all of those things that it wants to do really, really badly that you don't want it to do. I mean, it's been trained. If for example, if you ever, you're writing an article and you're like, okay, this is like, I'm trying to communicate an idea. This is kind of like a thought leadership thing. It's gonna look at the corpus of all thought leadership and all TED Talks and all the jargon and all that stuff, and it's gonna say, it's gonna try to make it sound like that, and that strips away your voice, because unless you sound like every TED Talk in a blender, which you don't, it doesn't represent your voice, and it takes a lot of deliberate action to extract unique qualities and characteristics out of generative AI content. But I mean, that's also part of kind of the fun of it. I think it's a challenge. The challenge of making all this stuff work and trying to produce results that are good and that people will like and that brands will like, and is a really fun challenge. The thing that I think about a little bit when we're talking about like the how to choose, where you can do it. One of the areas that we talk about a lot with my team and it surfaces with a lot of our clients is that sort of spectrum of sort of self-awareness about what the tool is. And for example, if you create something that's just like wild and fantastical and it's got all sorts of cool animations and transitions and things in it, people look at that and they know it's not real, right? The same way they would look at that and say, oh, that's a visual effect, right? If in a pre-AI era. And you're not mad at that, because like somebody dreamt up that thing in it, and it's not trying to trick me into thinking it's real. So that type of content, I find personally, when I look at it, I don't get that ick factor from it, because I'm like, it's not trying to trick me. I know that rabbit didn't turn into a motorcycle. I know that that's the case. I don't feel like I'm trying to be tricked. Where I get the ick is when it's like, I feel like you're trying to pull one over on me. I feel like you're trying to tell me that that happened, it's almost offensive if you're looking at something. Imagine watching something and it's a deep, heartfelt moment between two people, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a guy getting home from the war, and and then you recognize he's got an extra pinky, and you're like, that is frustrating because I feel lied to. I feel like
it's not real.
I put a little bit of my trust in, and I was giving you an emotion, and I feel like if I give you an emotion, especially if you're a brand, and you slap me with that, I that's a big turnoff. That feels icky. But if that same brand turned the rabbit into the motorcycle, I'm like, that was cool. I liked how that I like that animation or whatever. So I think there's definitely a whole area of sort of creative frameworks that I think, and every brand I think is gonna be different. Like, where is their criteria for where it works? I look at it in kind of like a 2-axis, to like overly simplified. I kind of think about it as a 2-axis grid where you've got on the bottom left, you've got things that have very low sort of emotional stakes to them, and that also don't have to be terribly unique to the brand. The brand doesn't have to show up in a really powerful way there. So like, think of a product blockout. It's like, it's your Coke can sitting on white and it's on Amazon, and it's just a product shot or something like that. Something very low stakes. It's not, you're not deeply emotionally invested in it. It doesn't have to feel wildly like the world of Coca-Cola is captured there and all of their aesthetics. It's just a picture of a can or fill in the blank, whatever the utility. Then you get the top right, which is like really high emotional stakes where the brand really needs to show up in a way that's really uniquely them. So on that end of the spectrum, it would be like a brand film, right? A manifesto, a big holiday tearjerker campaign, and a founder's story, a CSR video, right? And if you're there and you're messing around with like, maybe we'll cut a couple corners and we'll do this emotional story about our founders using AI. That's a danger zone right now. But you could generally feel pretty safe, I think, in the product blockout. And then, what's in between that? That's where I think people have to think. Maybe it's very obvious. Maybe anybody listening to this would be like, of course, that's really dangerous, and that would be dumb to do that there. And of course, that's safe. But I think it's more in the balance of what things are not those obvious cases where it, of course, you almost intuitively know whether it makes sense to do. And I think that grid changes whether you're a startup or whether you're a heritage legacy brand. If you're Disney or Ford or McDonald's, right? You can't step on it in that top corner and get away with it. And you'll hear about it, right? If people don't feel like it's sincere, they feel like they're being tricked. They feel like you're, cutting corners. You're better than this. You should have shot this with real actors. There's a lot of examples of that we see, right? But if you're a startup, if you're a smaller brand, people don't have that same kind of expectation and emotional sort of baggage that you carry for them. It's, I think you maybe have a little more permission to explore. If it was a new tech company and they did something with a, what was that? There was a really, what everybody called it, unhinged. It was like a betting site. It was just a totally insane, totally over the, do you know what I'm talking about? It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. They got some AI creator to do this ad, and everyone's screaming, and it's this fisheye lens. It was totally bananas, like intensity level. And it was sort of self-aware of its, it was clearly the only way to do this would have been kind of an AI. But a company that, I don't think people are mad at it. I think that was crazy. And you used an emerging tool to do it. But every brand, I think, is going to have their own sort of spectrum of like what's acceptable, what has that sort of dangerous quality, where do they not want to kind of screw up and kind of overstep. I think people are going to be figuring that out a lot this year. Like right now, I think people are thinking, now that it's finally ready for prime time, in a way, we're always saying, well, it's not ready for prime time yet. So you don't really have to worry about that, whether you're going to make your next Ford Explorer commercial with AI. You don't necessarily need to know that answer yet because it wasn't ready for prime time. It just didn't look good enough. The car didn't look real. So you didn't have to worry about it. Now, I mean, I think it was a Jeep ad, really beautiful. I want to say it was Jeep. I think it did pretty well at Cannes. Really cool ad. And it was an emotional story, and it was executed, with AI. And it's like, well, that's one of the first times I've seen prime time level execution. Smart. It was a person's idea, a really good idea. And they used AI as the tool to create the idea versus, and that's what it's all about. It's about the power of the idea. If you got a great idea and the tool, the AI, is in service of just making that idea possible. Um, I think it works, and that I was interested to see that ad because it had an emotional tenor to it. I'll have to find it, or you could post it in your thing.
Yeah, put it in the show notes.
But it's really, it was like, oh, I actually kind of, it's kind of emotional and sort of moving, is a long spot, and I was like, and knowing going into it that was made with AI didn't make me appreciate it less, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's an evolution. I was kind of excited to see that happen because I was like, I didn't know that you could get me a little bit verklempt, with something that I knew was AI, but
here we are.
it was pretty good. Yeah, but it wasn't a bunch of people. That was part of it too. It was a car and it was like a tire. It was, they anthropomorphized a tire that wanted to find. It was a tire that was on a journey to want to get onto the back of a Jeep that needed a spare, and it followed it across the country. So it had this weird blend of, like, it was fantastical and impossible. But because it wasn't a person faking an emotion, it was like the idea of this tire is like, oh, the cute little tire is trying to get to its home. It made it work,
Yeah, I think that's the big crux, is when it's, an inanimate object, or when it's humans. Like, we all know what humans look like and how they act. And I think, just when you connect with somebody in the real world, facial expression and body language is just so, like, core to, like, our animal programming going back millions of years. Yeah. I think that's where we kind of get we just noticed that something's slightly off the rails. Yeah. Well, Camm, fascinating conversation. I feel like we probably could have done this for another hour if we wanted to, but I want to be respectful of your time. So if folks want to learn more about Kepler or continue to follow along with your thinking, where do you want to send people to stay in touch?
Well, we're at Kepler Group, KeplerGRP.com is our website. Yeah, I'm on, I don't know, I'm not super prolific on social media, but I'm on LinkedIn. So anybody is interested in connecting on these kinds of topics, would love to do that. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. I agree. I could keep going for another hour. I love talking about this stuff. It's really fun.
I love it. Well, thanks for spending some time with the audience today. And for those of you who are seeing the show for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or subscribe. If you're listening, an honest review on whatever platform you might be listening on is how we find a bigger audience. So go ahead and do that if you wouldn't mind. And last but not least, if there's a creative out there, maybe a technologist, someone who's kind of splitting those dual thinking of right brain, left brain, or just thinking about the emerging way that we're thinking about applying creative and technology to our industry, especially through the lens of AI, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will wish you a great day. Appreciate you coming on, man.